Hello, and welcome to today's Friday Transportation Seminar. My name is Jason Anderson, and I will be introducing and moderating today's seminar. Our Friday Transportation Seminars have been a tradition since the year 2000. These seminars are once again being held live on Portland State University's urban campus, located on the ancestral homelands of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, and Watlala bands of the Chinook, the Tualatin Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. It is important to acknowledge we are here because of the sacrifices forced on the indigenous ancestors of this place. Remember these communities and honor their legacy, lives, and descendants. Today, we are pleased to have Becky Knudson presenting on Freight Moves the Oregon Economy. Becky Knudson is passionate about exploring data and generating information from what appears to be wild and chaotic. Becky is a senior transportation economist from the Oregon Department of Transportation, with responsibilities ranging from program management to technical analysis. She develops and applies economic, land use, and transportation forecast models for use in long-term range planning and policy analysis. She has worked for ODOT for 25 years, moving to Oregon from North Dakota after earning a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Minnesota at Moorhead. Becky earned a master's degree in economics from Oregon State University and worked with the state soon after to pursue her goal of public service. Here's a preview of the remaining speakers for the fall series. Oh, we're a little behind on the slides. As an overview of today's seminar, you can expect our speakers to present for about 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A. We will be receiving questions through the Q&A feature on your control panel, and we'll ask them at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time, all of your questions, we will give our speakers the opportunity to email written responses for any questions left unanswered. We have enabled closed captioning, but you must click on the CC feature on your control panel to view them. We will be recording today's webinar. It will be available on our website later today, along with the presentation slides. If you are tracking professional development hours, this webinar is eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credit. With that, I will hand it over to Becky.
Thank you, Jason. Oh, yes, I would like to move the slides. All specialization of skills. All right, thank you for the introduction. Pretty much, I think my North Dakota accent's gone. And you'll always know when I go home because I come back and talk like a North Dakotan. So today I'm going to talk about freight analysis, the planning that's behind it, why we do it, how we do it. And I just love the title of this. I've used it before. Freight moves the Oregon economy, or another way of saying it is freight is the economy in motion. So thanks for having me here to talk about all the cool stuff I do, because I love it. So generally the plan is to just talk about ODOT planning, what we do, how we do it and why, what it entails. And then my usual, economic context is really important. Economics. My unit consists of engineers. I joke about being the token economist, but I'm becoming an engineer who knows a lot about economics. And it's just turned out to be a wonderful fit for me. Very rewarding. I've been in my current role for nearly 20 years, and I don't expect to go anywhere before I just leave the workforce and lounge around as a retired person somewhere in the distant future. And then I'll talk about the freight, talk about freight data, freight analysis tools. But I think the most fun part, at least for me, is to talk about the freight analysis we have conducted. So I've put together 7 examples to try to bring all of this to life to you. And especially, I know this is a seminar for credit for students. So you're my target audience. I want to inspire you to come into public service and do really cool analysis and make a difference in the world that way without having to go out and be a politician or, directly interact with stakeholders. You can find your place in state service. And it's very, very rewarding for me and my coworkers as well. But it all starts with why we're here. Oregon Department of Transportation has a mission, a clear mission. It's really short, but it's a big job. We provide a safe and reliable multimodal transportation system that connects people and helps Oregon's communities and the economy thrive. It's all there in that one little statement. Now, the planning behind that is broad and wide as well. And the planning could be over a range of time periods. It could be, what are you planning to do today? Where are you striping the pavement? Or what are you planning in the next 2 years? That's related to our budgeting process. And then there's a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan and a 20-year plan. So we do have a lot of planning going on behind all the work that we do. It hasn't been very visible. So we've been working hard to explain this to people who often have incomplete information and they think, oh, that just does this stuff randomly. It's crazy. But no, we have a plan and we have lots of plans and they all kind of roll up into each other. So we'll start with the Oregon Transportation Commission. They are the policy body that works with and directs ODOT and gets information from stakeholders and the public. It's their job to find out what people need and they're asking for. And then that trickles down to ODOT's planning and what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. So within this report, this is the 5-year strategic plan titled Position for the Future, is this wonderful schematic that I hadn't seen before. And it really lays it out for you. We all have very distinct roles and responsibilities. So again, as I said, the Oregon Transportation Commission is really at the high level policy end. What do we need? What are our priorities? And from there, it's like ODOT is responsible for implementing that. How are we going to meet the goals and objectives that are listed by the Oregon Transportation Commission? How are we going to make it real and translate this activity into action and confirm the results are what we expected and intended? Because things are always changing underneath us and we don't always know why or how. So we have to sometimes be reactive, but collect more and more data, different data, really pay attention to what's going on, because basically your transportation system is supporting all of this different economic activity with a variety of actors involved. Of course, the two groups overlap. And so together we work on our transportation system designed to meet our goals and support a robust, thriving economy while supporting livability in the state of Oregon. I came here as a grad student. I stayed here. It's a beautiful place and we want to keep it that way. So for ODOT, this all begins with our umbrella plan, and that's the Oregon Transportation Plan, the OTC. We have, in ODOT, when I began working, I was handed a 25-page list of acronyms. And there's acronyms of acronyms. And now there's acronyms that are the same, but they have completely different meanings. So one of my goals today is to not speak acronyms, or at least to clearly tell you what they mean. So the OTP, that's our umbrella plan. And the way, again, it's kind of this higher level policy plan, and it has objectives and goals that are a little more detailed. And under that umbrella plan, we have these topic or modal plans. And you can see there's a lot of them. There's one related to public transportation, rail, the rail plan. There's a transportation options plan, which is relatively new in our planning world, where it kind of brings it all together. How do you move from one mode to another mode? It's not just for freight, logistics, it's people logistics. So you drive here, you park, you take the train, you take the bus, or you walk it. If you're missing something in that system that's connecting these different modes, people won't use it because of that one weakness. So that was a very important plan that we developed. And bicycle and pedestrian plan, transportation safety, highway plan, aviation plan, and then today we'll talk a little more about the freight plan. So we have a lot of planning. My coworkers aren't just engineers. We're in the analysis unit, and our coworkers just in the neighboring section, that's the planning section. So it's planners and engineers coming together with a token economist telling everybody what to do because it's the economy, stupid. I don't really say that, but so the Oregon freight plan, we had our first plan in around 2010. So we're currently updating. It's gone through several updates, but this is just a real basic update where we update the information and the data. So it's current, and we are planning to have a larger update. Those take a lot more time because you're doing real expansive analysis. And this plan has federal mandates that it must meet. It's a 20-year long-range plan. And it tries to clearly state goals and objectives and how they fit together and what the priorities are so that we can be very strategic in our investments and work with our stakeholders to keep track of what their needs are. Freight is tricky. It's not a thing. I hear people talk about freight and what they really mean are trucks. Oh, I hate all this freight stuff because when I drive on the highway in the rain, the trucks spray all this water in my windshield, and they're giant, and it's all these complaints. And I remember being at a conference listening to someone once who said, I was in a public meeting for a city planning group, and one of the people in the audience stood up and really complained that you need to do something about these Walmart trucks. They're in the way, they're big, they park, and all these complaints. And a city councilor stood up and said, ma'am, do you shop at Walmart? And she said, yes, I do. He said, well, stop shopping at Walmart. And we won't need those trucks full of the stuff that you buy. I love telling people that story because if you wore it, if you use it, if you eat it, it came on a truck at some point. It might've been that last mile, it might've been the delivery to your house, but the transportation is really important to you more than you realize. So we have our freight plan, and this gives you a view of the general process. You start off the project with a kickoff meeting and talk to everybody about what's needed, what should we do, what do we have time to do, and what do we have to put off. And we have oversight from the Oregon Freight Advisory Committee. So we have to prepare information. We don't just throw data and charts at them. They want information so they can turn it into knowledge and figure out what should be done, what should be put into print in this document. So they see us quite a bit when we're working through plans, and there's public hearings for people to state their opinions or their needs in that public realm. So there's plenty of opportunities. We put that into the planning process for people to be heard. And then at the very end, we have a formal final plan, and the Oregon Transportation Commission, as well as ODOT, it's adopted. It's an adopted official plan, and it shows you what we are going to do over the next 20 years. They're updated about every 5 years. So the future changes, you don't know, but you can still plan ahead and then change your trajectory as new information is found or things pop up that you can't expect. And we all personally know how that can happen so quickly over just the course of a year or 2 or 3. This is a new quote for me. Richard Dawkins is a biologist, and he's talking about economics and basically saying economics is everywhere. You just may not realize it. So in biology, you have benefits and costs. It's a competitive market out there in the real world, and nothing is free. Nothing's free in life for anybody, even if you're a frog or a dog or a person. There's always trade-offs. You have to pay. You may not have to pay in money, but you pay in time. You pay in different ways. And it brought me joy to see this quote from a biologist. So this is the less interesting picture of economics. you have all these agents, these economic agents. When I go to high schools and I talk about my work here, because I have a very unusual career path. I'm actually a labor economist. I can't, the fact that I'm here is just a strange journey I didn't expect to take, but I'm so happy it happened. But we have these economic agents, and then I have these visuals with, secret agents sneaking around doing economic stuff for the students. Anything that gives them a laugh, or high school students here and middle school, it works. So if you ever have to talk to them, that's a good advice for you. So we've got all these different aspects of our economy. You've got households buying and selling things, and they're workers, so they're providing labor, and that's a factor of production. You have businesses that are buying commodities and labor to make the things and provide the services that they sell. And you have the government, another agent responsible for public sector activity. And Oregon is a very trade dependent state. So we care about how we can access markets external to the state. And the biggest one you could think of is Intel, where their customers are all over the world. So we have to think about all this different activity, and it's accommodated by the transportation system. And you can see that's how it's directly related to transportation and the economy, where the economic activity generates this derived demand for transportation. We need to be aware of these market forces in order to take action that actually results in the outcomes we were looking for. And those are defined in our plans. Sometimes there's hidden information, especially when it comes to freight. These are private sector competitors, and we don't have information or data on their behavior. Households are easier because we have household surveys and we ask people about their travel, when, where, why. But freight is so challenging. We've tried surveying them so many times over the last 20 years, and it's really costly and very time consuming, and the sample sizes are really small. So, I leave that to our research partners here to figure that out. So there's my super big economic context plug. But what I plan to do today is talk about, we've got data and tools which are very, very important to make decisions that are based on fact, not hearsay, not anecdotal, not based on your personal preference. If I work graveyard shift and I never see a Walmart truck, I wouldn't even think about freight or something like that getting in the way or causing disruption. And I could easily say, well, we don't have to worry about trucks. They don't cause any trouble. Well, that's not true. So you've got to gather actual observed data, verify it's high quality, it's complete, and then develop tools that have been tested and validated, calibrated, and they're kept up to date to do your work, to feed information. You take data, you make it into information, and decision makers use that to establish knowledge and then apply it. So we use economic data and we use transportation data. You could have the coolest data in the world or the most fabulous model in the world, but if you're not utilizing those things within a process that is sound and it's correctly involving the right people at the right time, all your work will be wasted. No one will see it. And I am telling you this from personal experience. No one told me this in school. So some of the things I want to share are things I learned the hard way. And it's very painful to learn those things the hard way. So you may not be a planner, you may be an engineer, but you have to watch for that planning process to be sound. And sometimes you've got planners who are more analytical and they're more interested in the analysis, they forget about the planning. So it's a team effort, and everybody needs to keep everybody else in check together. So we love data. It's easy to pick on modelers because they say, well, we just need more data. We can't do anything, but we can do a lot, but we do want more data all the time, and we want it for free, and we want it tomorrow. So we're humans, what can I say? But we have a lot of transportation data at ODOT. We have traffic volumes, we have traffic speeds, crash data about individual accidents, just crash rates, corridors that are safety hazards. We have these travel surveys we collect from households. We need those for our urban models. And then we have access to commodity flow data. So that's what's moving in those trucks and trains and airplanes and marine boats. And we also have access to a lot of economic data. So we do need to understand population growth, but also where are they going and why, and where are they working? What industry are they providing labor to? And also that big where they live versus where they work. So that's their commute trip. These kinds of things matter. And we have amazingly accurate geocoded data for all of that. It's really, really helped us advance our tools and our analysis. And then standard economic statistics like the gross state product, like how big is Oregon's economy? How fast is it growing? And things like inflation. Right now we have record levels of inflation and it really affects people's behavior. So we have to keep tabs on all of that. So I'm going to highlight tools. We have a bunch of tools, but these are like super cool and what I was thinking of at the time. This one's new. This is RITIS. It's the Regional Integrated Transportation Information System. It's a wonderful new thing we have where we're partnering with other public agencies in like this pooled funded project with the University of Maryland. And they've built this platform where you can put your data into it and you also have access to INRIC speed data. And so we have our traffic volumes, we have our crash rates, we have everything for our transportation network, as well as our neighbors. They get to use it too for their work. And it produces beautiful visuals. You can see results quickly without having to go through a lot of work to visualize it and understand what it's saying. So it's giving us information from all of our data. On the freight side, we have access to the Freight Analysis Framework. So it's FAF. Right now we're in FAF version 5. When it first started, it was produced by Federal Highway Administration. And it takes a long time to develop these data sets and figure out what works, what doesn't. And they've gone through 5 iterations. And once they got to FAF 4, we realized it was so clean and so understandable that we use it as a direct unprocessed input into our statewide model. That saves us so much time and money. So I cannot say enough good things about that FAF data set. And I hope FHWA always gets funding to support that. We have household travel demand models. So those are standard for large cities, metropolitan areas. They really focus on the household activity. And there's typically some component for trucks because it's a shared system. But it depends on where the model is and who's developing it. Because Oregon has such unique land use laws, we've had to develop models that are more sophisticated than a lot of places across the country. And it's funny, you know, you go and you make presentations in other states and you're at a conference and people say, oh, Oregon, you're so wonderful and your tools are so sophisticated. But it's like, well, no, they're a necessity. We just have to do it. And other places that have to do something similar, we can help move the field ahead and develop more and more sophisticated tools because the questions are becoming more and more sophisticated. This is why we do it. And then finally, the love of my life is the SWIM, the statewide integrated model, which has got the economy integrated with land use, integrated with the transportation system. And that is our tool for freight analysis. So you're going to hear all the examples today are using that specific tool. And it's basically in its 3rd generation form right now. And it's really greatly improved since when it was first established in the early 2000s. So those were 4 tools, but we really have a ginormous toolbox. So if you would like to look through it in detail, we have a web page. It looks like this. There's a quick snapshot, but every bar represents a drop-down menu with a whole bunch of detailed tools. Some we developed, some we've adopted from other states, some we use from Federal Highway. So it's just a bunch of different tools. And They're very precise in what they do or don't do. It's, you have to, as an analyst, you have to remember you have a toolbox and really listen to the question to figure out how to conduct the analysis. What we typically get are people coming to us saying, we need you to do this with a statewide model. It's like, well, no, that question, I could do it in a spreadsheet in a day. So don't tell us the tool you want us to use. Tell us the question you're really trying to answer. That's been really challenging to do, but we're getting better at communicating that with our customers. So if you want to dig into all these tools, they're out there waiting for you to read all about it. So now it's storytelling time. This is the fun part. I get to tell you all about the cool stuff we do and have done, and we will continue to do. Most anything related to the statewide model. I do this work with my partner, Alex Bettinardi. Yes, he's an engineer, but you know, he's great anyway. But no, Alex and Alex is so creative and resourceful with the limitations we have in our tools. And then working together, we've done way more than either one of us would ever have predicted with what we have to work with. And this one was particularly exciting for me alone because I finally gotten to a point where I was trained and knowledgeable enough to take this on as my own project. So I didn't have Alex with me in the room listening to this, and it involved freight, which is so strongly related to the economy. And I was so excited to do something really fancy with this tool. And the objective was clear. We need to have a freight plan. And we had a tool to do it. And we knew what needed to be done. But there was this huge challenge, completely unexpected for me as a fairly new analyst. We were in the middle of the Great Recession. Fuel prices were $5 a gallon, and that's not inflation adjusted. $5 a gallon in 2009. And that's all people could think about. And we are trade dependent. So when there's a recession that's global, it really hits Oregon hard, and it takes us longer to dig out of it. So it just was very dismal looking, that context, that economic context. And I thought, okay, well, they're going to talk about it at this meeting. And then the next meeting, they talked about it again. It just never made progress on the plan. They couldn't make progress. And I was naive and frustrated, like, what is wrong? Of course, it's a business cycle. Of course, we'll come out of it. Of course, it's just short term. Nope, couldn't bring their minds out of the present day. So what we did was unexpected for me, but it was very straightforward. We took the official Oregon statewide revenue forecast, and we also took the pessimistic version and the optimistic version, because you always have to have these boundaries, like what if things grow faster or slower than you expect? We called the reference scenario the blue. That's the official forecast. The red represents pessimistic. That's how much it'll shrink if we grow slower. And then hidden underneath is green, which represented the higher growth. And we had not ever displayed this information visually like this. We just talked, in tables, and we needed a faster way to impart information to our target audience, and that's these decision makers in this committee. And so Alex tricked the software that does traffic assignment into visualizing commodity flows to make a very simple point, that whether we grow fast or we grow slow, people eat and they do stuff and they wear stuff, and we need to accommodate freight movement. So the chart at the top has a little bit of green on the edge of the blue. That's the additional commodity flows you would see if our economy grew faster. It's just a little bit more. And then the opposite here below in the red, you see a little bit of the dark blue. The dark blue is that reference scenario. We would have a little bit less commodity flow if the economy remained at a very slow growth rate. And it was like literally like a half-hour presentation done. They're like, okay, let's make a plan. And I thought, well, that's not what I expected, but I sure learned a lot. And it was fun. That visualization was amazing. Here's my second example. This is about preparing for the big earthquake Cascadia subduction zone right around 2012. There's more and more research saying this is coming and we're overdue. And there was more and more data and understanding of how that plate worked and who it affected, the entire coastline, the Pacific Ocean. And we were asked to, and we knew that we had a seismic retrofitting program to reinforce our bridges. They weren't built for an earthquake of 9.0. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Bridges are really important, more than you would think. Underneath them, you have utilities, you've got electricity, you've got water, you've got gas, you've got all this. It's all connected to bridges. And if they fall apart, you can't get your emergency services people there. You've got utilities that are out of commission. And on the state highway system alone, we have 1,179 bridges. And there's even more than that on the city and the county roads as well. So we've got a lot of bridges in Oregon. And to me, just as a person, it's like, well, of course we have to retrofit our bridges, duh. But no, the director's office is like, yes, but we have to make a business case. So we need that from you. And that's what we did. We got a lot of information from our bridge analysis unit, or from the bridge model. And we needed to monetize and bring this to life. Like, how much will it cost us to invest and what will it save us? So it came down to this basic message. We will spend $1.8 billion to fix the bridges, and it will help us avoid economic losses of $84 billion. So when it comes to business decisions, you want to know the return on your investment. So in this case, that ratio is 46. It's like 46, it's huge. We're happy if it's 1.2, just anything over 1. I went ahead and tried and worked on a paper about this work. And when one of the reviewers reviewed it, they said, yeah, but the probability of the earthquake happening isn't, 100% in the next year or 10 or 20. You need to weight that 46 value by the probability of the earthquake. And it's like, duh. So at that point, we were hearing that it was 12% probability the earthquake would occur in the next 50 years. So when you weight it, you get a benefit cost ratio of 5.5, still well above 1. Yes. And then literally within 6 months, that number went from 12% probability to 38% probability. So again, then the weighted value goes up. But no matter how you do it, it's clear it's a good return on investment. And we made a good business case to the legislature. They have to figure out how to spend money across so many different public services. ODOT can't just assume that, well, obviously we need this, you just give it to us. They say, well, what about medical? What about social services? What about education? You have to help them with real world based information so they can use that, create knowledge, and make their decisions based on observed data. And you need to make it digestible. So what we did is we created these maps that visualize the isolation that different parts of the state will experience. It'll take, the darker the color on this map, the longer it takes them to get all the bridges fixed, digging out of that event and accessing their markets. And in the meantime, while they're waiting for that to occur, people are moving away, businesses are closing, shifting to another location because they can't make a living in isolation. So this was a very excellent tool for us to use when we were telling our story. And we hadn't really put it in these terms before. So it's very effective. Here's my third example. This is the Eagle Creek wildfire. It occurred in 2017, early September. And boy, did it spread fast. It covered, in the end, covered almost 50,000 acres. It occurred right near Cascade Locks, and by November, it wasn't quite fully out, but by November of that year, it had cost over $20 million to fight that fire. We had 35 miles of fire line. So 30 miles of that was by dozer. 5 miles of fire line was hand shoveled by firefighters. I mean, it was a huge effort. And 5,000 homes and buildings were threatened by this. And there were even hikers that had to be rescued immediately because it spread so fast. This was a really big deal. On the transportation side, it shut down I-84. It's a tremendous amount of traffic on that highway. It shut it down in one direction for 10 days and 19 days in the other direction. It also closed down the historic Columbia River for 11 weeks, as well as the rail line nearby for 3 days. The visibility was so bad they couldn't use it. So it was a big deal. So we got a question from a legislator, and it was very specific. He wanted to know how this affected commercial traffic. And what he really meant was trucks. What happened to the trucks? How did it affect them? And so that was our mission, is to do it like that day, do it really quick and monetize it. So it's meaning, it has some meaning to people. So what happened was where the freeway was, or interstate freeway was closed, cars were allowed to cross the Columbia River and use State Route 14 in Washington. No big deal. It barely added any time to their travel and no distance. There weren't any extra costs for them. Trucks were not allowed to do that. That state route is not made for heavy trucks like that. So they just made it clear. And you're on your own, trucks. Now, ODOT has official detours, and they were promoted by the agency, but they weren't used. Because I went back and looked at the traffic volumes and they weren't used. So that's like, oh, okay, so that's a behavioral choice. We don't really know why, but obviously it didn't fit what they needed. What they did do was actually predicted by the model. So when you have a model that's this complex and big, you don't always know what it's going to tell you when you put some kind of shock into it. But I was so happy to see that the model actually reproduced and simulated what the trucks actually did. And we were able to validate that later using a new data source that actually had access to transponders in trucks. And you could see how they routed. So this was an amazing thing because we did it right. And what we did is we estimated the daily cost of the closure to all the heavy freight trucks. And depending on the time of year, we didn't quite know what the volumes would have been there because it's fall, it's a transitional period. It fell between $250,000 and $290,000 a day. And the freeway was closed for multiple days. So this was a big deal. I mean, these trucks, they went around on Oregon 35, they went around Mount Hood. You know, it's narrower, it's steeper. All those trucks went around Mount Hood, and then they entered Portland from the east, and some made their way within the city to their final destinations, and a lot of them went to I-5 and north and then south to their final destination. So it was just fascinating to see how this played out, and to have a tool that actually worked. It was really awesome. Another example relates to landslides, especially on the coast of Oregon when we have the Coast Range, and the highway, US 101, is right along the ocean. It is constantly having landslides, and we are constantly, as an agency, in this reactive mode. So which slide do we have to work on today? How many days will it be closed? Or maybe it's so bad it just slides into the ocean and it won't be open for a year. We have to figure out, how are we going to attack this problem? Because it's not going away, but we have very limited resources in this area. So these 4 examples of repeat offenders, they just constantly having landslide and earth moving events that people have to deal with. And ODOT is also broken out into 5 regions, and every region has like a central office, and then there's districts. We have crews all over the state. And sometimes events like this will just suck up crews from half the state. It's just incredibly expensive to be reactive. We cannot sustain that. So what we're doing is we're providing information using the statewide model to a team of researchers at Oregon State University, and they are very carefully and methodically going through this challenge and looking at all the types of hazards and coming up with a way for ODOT to strategically prioritize our investments so that we get the best return on our dollar, given that we have limited resources. And we have provided information, what happens when they're closed and how do trucks and cars react. And they're going to use all that and present findings and estimate economic impacts and kind of that return on investment calculation. And I believe that this will probably be published late summer of next year. So that was really interesting. I learned a lot about engineering of this land. And they've been using LiDAR and discovering there's more landslides than we thought. It's scary sometimes. Okay, I have 7 examples. I want to stay on time. Here's one. My 5th example is just simple. It's just providing commodity flow data to a customer. We have a Bend travel demand model. So that's a household level, and it really does a great job with cars and people. And trucks are there, but they're just kind of trucks that take up more space. They're like big cars in a way. They're treated like that. But we don't really have the behavioral or the activity in those models. So we can use a statewide model. It uses the FAF data on commodity flow. And the MPO planner there came to us and said the MPO policy board is planning ahead for the transportation system, but they're not talking about freight. I brought it up and they just said, what freight? What do you mean? Yeah, there's a few trucks, but that's not a big deal. So he asked us to show how much freight was moving through the area. And we picked 5 locations. We picked the outskirts of the town of the city of Bend on Highway 20, goes east and west. And we picked outskirts of Bend, north and south, US 97, and then right in the center of the city, and reported commodity flows in terms of value and tonnage. And it made it very clear what's going on. Freight's a big deal. There's a lot of freight going through your area. So if you want to do some traffic calming and reduce speeds, if it's a freight route, usually that means narrowing and putting in shoulders, and you've got bike paths, and you're going to have conflicts with trucks, and then that's a safety hazard. So you have to take all of these things into consideration when you're making these plans. And this made it very clear that freight needed to be considered and part of the process. And this was a daily volume, on average during a weekday. This is how much freight is moving in terms of dollars and tonnage. And about a year later, we were asked by ODOT staff in Region 4 about commodity flows, but specifically for agricultural products. There was a federal grant available, and we could apply for it to get some money to support agricultural infrastructure. So we basically reran the same process, but only pulled out the ag products. And agriculture is seasonal. So we provided annual numbers, but you can see that there's $5 billion, wherever you look, pretty much, there's every year about $5 billion in 2017 moving through the Bend area that's related to ag. And tons and tons. So agricultural products are unprocessed. So they're typically lower value, heavyweight, unlike a box of computer chips held up at a meeting or a conference I went to. An Intel speaker was holding up this little box, and he said, I'm holding $1 million of freight, and I need to get this to market fast, and I'm having troubles because US 26 is really congested. So we have to understand all those differences in freight and their different needs. And finally, this one is just a shining example of what to do right. Rough roads ahead. We were trying to explain that when you let things deteriorate, you get to a point where it'll deteriorate so much faster, it'll cost you far much more money to fix it. So we need to be strategic and attack this now. We were having trouble explaining what this really meant to our director's office. So we did kind of a proof of concept study, and that was the Rough Roads Ahead 1. We didn't have time or I guess partnerships to get the data we needed from the pavement section and the bridge section, but we could rough it out enough to really demonstrate what we're talking about. And once we did that and showed them what we were talking about, we were given the go-ahead to do a full study, and we got information from the bridge deterioration model and the pavement deterioration model, and we had our economic transport land use model, and that is what we did for Rough Roads Ahead 2. We were learning that people thought we didn't plan or prioritize anything. So we took the time to really explain what we do and how we do it. So here's a map of our priorities. Apparently, a lot of people never even saw this. It was buried somewhere in a bridge report. And it's very clear, and it includes our seismic investment plan as well. We don't have enough money to fix everything. We know that. And so we have been strategic in our investments for a long time, but it wasn't really common knowledge. So this was kind of an opportunity to bring it all together and tell people the ODOT story about the highway system. We also took a lot of time to ground it in budget reality. So in the upper left scenario is what we had in funding at the time. And we explained the impact inflation has on our purchasing power, how it impacts our business. And our inflation is not like your personal inflation, buying milk, bread, and eggs. We have to buy asphalt and rebar, and oh my gosh, the inflation was so high in that area. We also talked about what we need to make everything perfect and approach it from the engineering perspective, just doing what we're supposed to do as engineers and take care of our assets, which is a huge amount of money. We know that, but it's a boundary. And then in between, we had scenarios that had some kind of higher investment, but not as much as we identified in need. And then we brought that to life in the real world. If we were to get more funding as represented in scenario 2 or 3 or 4, this is what it would mean in more fuel tax, because Oregon, it's a little unique in the funding side. We have a dedicated highway fund. We do not use general fund money like a lot of other states do. So anything that affects people's driving and use of gas, like higher fuel efficiency cars, we get less revenue. We have less revenue, we can't invest as much. So this really helped make the decision makers understand what we were saying. We use maps. Here's the 1,179 maps. This is a picture of what we can do with our current budget in 2016 as we forecast it according to the bridge deterioration model. We have enough money to work on 130 bridges. We will have to weight restrict 370 of them. So that's your red dot. And then there's all these guys in between. 679 bridges are just going to be kind of let go for a while. And we did this for every scenario, making it clear what they get for that additional funding, what we'll do with it and why, and focusing on our priority corridors. And then the big punchline was, if we don't keep the system in decent shape, it's going to affect the cost of freight movement. When you restrict a bridge, the trucks can't use it, then it costs them more and there's less activity. So that translates into fewer jobs in the future and also a smaller economy. So the gross domestic product drops. Very clear and understandable. We had a lot of data for the state system. So that's the darker colors in the graph, or dark red here, light green there. And then we didn't have the county city data, but we kind of tried to simulate it and demonstrated how much more the system costs go up when you can't take care of those local roads. So these are the key points I was hoping you would take from this. You have to plan things. To be effective, you have to plan because there are scarce resources. So you have to be thoughtful and strategic. And also ready for more money if it comes in too. So that's part of the strategy. But economic context is key. I'm sure you all know that now, because those are the people and businesses using the system. So you need to understand that. And that process is really important. If you want your work to be implemented and make a difference in the world, they have to use a good process and include everybody it affects, so all the stakeholders. And communication, see, now that this is where we put a lot of effort into the last 5-10 years, where, as an analyst, you tend to just say, well, the data tells you what you need to know. And it's like, no, data itself is useless. You have to turn in information, and then the decision makers will decide what that information means to them and create their own knowledge, and then go out into the world and make it a better place. And that's why I love my work. So I left 10 minutes. That's not my plan, but it's something. If there's too many questions, I'm happy to just answer them in writing. But now it opened up to you guys, so I have to give that.
Perfect.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Becky. That was a great presentation. For those viewing the webinar, please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A feature in the control panel on the bottom of your Zoom window. And we'll start with a question if there's one in the room. Cameron?
Hey, I'd be curious to go back to the slide where you talked about the costs for bridge replacement for the sake of seismic retrofitting. The price tag that you listed for the replacement of all the bridges, for seismic retrofit was at 1.8 billion. And as we look at the project here for the I-5 bridge replacement, the budget for that project alone, which I imagine falls under this umbrella, is almost 3 times that cost. So
Yeah.
curious how that number was calculated.
That project and a couple others, so they're so large, they were not under this umbrella. So it would be even bigger. Yes. Actually, I don't really know because how the projects are defined can change, and I've been very out of touch of that. And that work is really the focus of our ODOT Region 1 people. So I'm the wrong person to answer that question.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. I was curious, how does ODOT balance freight and particularly trucks against safety for other modes of transportation? I was specifically thinking about bike and ped because I obviously understand the need to keep freight moving, but then I'm also thinking about how another person was hit on Powell like within the last 24 hours.
Right. So that's the tricky part. That's the really hard part of the job. We have all these different users. And even if you're looking at only at cars, there's big cars, little cars, medium trucks, but big trucks. So every facility, when we invest in it, we have to take that into consideration. All the users, the safety aspects, the environmental aspects with water drainage and wildlife. It is a very difficult job. If safety was the only priority for ODOT, we would simply close down all the roads and highways. That way, no one can die, but we can't do that. So we have to find a way to try to meet all of our goals to the best possible way and mitigating those negative things like that. So I don't have a good answer for you. It is very challenging. And that, when we do a good job, it makes it very rewarding. But when things like that happen, that you can't put a price on a human life, you just learn from it and do your best to prevent it next time. That was a hard question.
All right, we'll go to some online questions now.
Great. So I think I'll start with the first question that came in, which is, there are proposed new thresholds regionally and statewide that accepts congestion on the throughways, for example, I-5. Is TPAU evaluating the economic impacts of accepting congestion throughout the day, such as the ability for Oregon to attract businesses and the financial impacts on the price of goods for the common person from freight being stuck in congestion?
Thank you. Okay, another hard question. So this was a specific ask about what my unit does, TPAO, the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit. ODOT has our region offices, so Portland area, all the highways here in the vicinity. It's a Region 1 issue, and they have traffic engineers and planners working on it, and other parts of the Region 1 offices. My unit's role is mostly related to the speed data that measures the congestion. So that's that RITIS platform I mentioned earlier in a slide. We have also used our statewide model to enhance and validate the modeling done to look at congestion, but that was being done using the Metro travel demand model, and they have a freight model. So it's a large effort, And tools and methods are being used by multiple players to figure all of this out. So my unit's role was relatively small, and the heavy work is being done by Region 1 staff. So it would be fascinating to get someone from Region 1 up here to talk about projects like that and just realities of what we have to face when we have such a limited funding and high growth. Half of Oregon's population growth locates in the Portland vicinity every year. So that's a lot of people to accommodate.
And another question from in person.
Thank you, Becky. Great presentation. My question is more like for the kind of the younger audience and students interested in transportation, and just thinking in terms of the needs you see in terms of people thinking about this economic freight issues, but also if you go back to grad school, imagine what classes would you take or what would you recommend people learn that will be useful? And I know it's a maybe complicated question, but if you can have some short advice, that would be great.
Okay, well, let's see. It just seems like the more breadth you have, the better you are prepared for the real world analysis. So there is, of course, the engineering component. So you learn about engineering methods and data and statistics. Using the data properly is really important. And a lot of people don't like math. They just take the minimal math, but it's really powerful. So you should look into that as well, especially statistics. And the planning side is really important. So just getting an exposure to planning, the planning process, all the different players that are involved with that. That also helps give you context. And then of course, the economic context. Granted, my coworkers or the average age in my unit is higher. I've asked all of them, what kind of economics did you take? And they said, well, I took a class in benefit cost. It's like, well, yes, but when did you take an economics class? Not an accounting class. That to me, that's an accounting class. And very few people have taken those classes. And this was an important lesson because when I first joined TPOW, they basically hired me to understand the economic role that was represented in that new statewide model. But they're asking me all these macro questions about unemployment and gross. And I thought, well, I'm a microeconomist. I like labor and I don't know anything about that stuff. But then I realized, oh, no, people are, well, my manager made me realize they're asking you these questions for a reason and you need to have the answers. They don't know this stuff. Do not assume people know all this. So it's like those three things together somehow would really enhance a person's ability to be more effective on the job. But I think programs are doing that more and more. And I'm also seeing, and we had a new engineer come in and they're allowed to kind of do this rotation around the agency and work in different areas. And, you know, there's experience learned at every location. And this engineer realized, I really like the planning process. I think I'm going to look for a job in planning and then I can enhance the work with my engineering skills. And I thought that is brilliant. Yes, do that. And then we've had planners and geographers. They're very analytical. So a lot of it too is just your interests. And I had no idea what I was going to do. I mean, literally no idea. I changed my major like 5 or 6 times. Started out with art. And here I am, a labor economist working for a DOT doing this work. But my father, the PhD physicist, just said, just follow your heart and you'll be fine. And he was right. It's just, it was a weird journey. So that's kind of a non-answer, but a big answer. And people have limited money and time to stay in school all that time, but you can read. There's like great economic books out there. You can read your free time.
Awesome. So we have time for one more question and we'll take one more from online.
Great. And so this person is wondering, and I imagine maybe others are as well, have you had to modify any freight forecasts due to the impacts of COVID? And what does Oregon freight look like now compared to pre-COVID?
So we have been asked that question. And, you know, the data is fairly aggregate, so we don't really understand the real detail. Like, is there more e-commerce? Well, we know that from other data sources, but can I tell you what that means in more trucks? Nope, we just don't have that much detail. We have noticed that there's different time patterns in trucks and cars. So the rush hour is not like it used to be, or the peak hour in the morning, or so there's like these overall patterns that are changing, and yet some of them aren't changing too much. And it's not just COVID. We've got logistical challenges that weren't just because of COVID, and we have scarcity and we can't find truck drivers, and there's just all these different things going on. But the beauty in these long range plans is you just kind of go for that distant trajectory, which is updated periodically to reassess and I guess, validate or update tools and assumptions. So it's kind of an ongoing, always changing and improving kind of work, and nothing is stagnant. It's we have to be agile and just kind of keep watching it and looking. So as a good economist would say, I can give you a good answer in 10 years. You know, it's that kind of thing, because there's so many moving parts. But it does make it really interesting. So you should all be economists.
That was a great way to do it. So thank you, everyone. So again, thank you everyone for attending today's Friday Transportation Seminar. For those of you attending online, after the seminar ends, you'll have the opportunity to complete a brief survey about today's event. Please, it only takes a few minutes and we would really appreciate your feedback. Also a reminder for those of you online, if your questions weren't answered, all questions are forwarded to the speaker. And Becky, thank you so much again for speaking today. It was a great presentation. And then to all of you online and in person for joining us, have a wonderful weekend.